You have joined the NEMSIS v3 implementation call for June 26th. Thanks for joining us this morning. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to have this conversation with us. Please feel free to add your comments and questions. You can either do that by unmuting your microphone or using the group chat, and we'll keep an eye on that as well. This is a participatory conversation, so please feel free to contribute or ask questions throughout, and we appreciate that. We're going to go ahead and get started with Clay. He's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the suggested lists that we've been working on. Clay, are you ready for that?
I am ready. May I go ahead and share my screen?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. All right, can you see my screen, Julianne?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so thank you. I have 3 items to cover this morning. First off, wanted to bring everybody kind of up to date with what we're doing right now to complete the work associated with a revision of suggested lists. So just a little bit of history here before I kind of I delve into where we are in this process and what we think still remains to be discussed. We developed the suggested list, as you may recall, before version 3 really had caught fire. And so we actually built those lists by looking at the items that were in an element, for example, in version 2. Then we also reached out to software companies and asked them, with that very truncated list, let's, for example, think about cause of injury, so E-Injury 01. What other causes of injury had customers asked to be added to the list of cause of injuries in version 2? As we gathered together all those ones that folks had asked for to be added in addition, and that formed the beginnings of a suggested list for cause of injury, for example. Those lists were reviewed by the DMC over hours of conversations, and we excluded and then included others and came up with those suggested lists. Now that we have a substantial amount of data that's been collected with version 3, we can actually look at what people are using, and our charge was to redo those suggested lists based on what's actually being reported by our providers and to see if we can tighten those lists up. So I know that the decision has been made really not to have the suggested list be mandatory within software, and that there be a process in place so that data, for example, related to cause of injury could be rolled up at the state level. The ICD-10 codes could be rolled up at the state level and rolled up at the national level, allowing the providers to have kind of maximum use of those, of all ICD-10 codes. That sounds really good, I think, from our perspective, but we're still hearing and receiving accounts at the local level that they're struggling both with accuracy and with the time necessary to find the proper codes when we keep such a broad list available and open. So I think our users are still struggling a little bit. Maybe some state data managers or vendors could speak to whether that's true or not. But let me show you what we have done so far just based on that history, and we'll see how we want to move forward. So as my example, we're going to be talking about E-Injury 01, cause of injury. I just note here, you'll see that in 2017, when we look at those 9 million records that were submitted to NEMSIS, we had actually 1,365 different ICD-10 codes submitted to us to represent injuries. Folks will remember that the current suggested list has about 144 codes. It had a tiered system where there were 25 tier 1s, and I'll show you an example of that just to refresh your memory. We on purpose deliberately built this in a tiered system, hoping to guide vendors to see the value of maybe having a multi-logic for clicking into a specific, for example, cause of injury, where, for example, there could be an indication to the provider that if you're interested in some type of asphyxiation, click here, and then it would open up these options, right? And if you look at these options, you can clearly see that there was probably a fair number of these codes that were added to software products. This is the old list, and so clearly things like maybe plastic, suffocation of plastic bag or refrigerator, you wouldn't necessarily expect that to happen a lot, but it was a special request by states, and there were custom values added under version 2 by software products with these requests. So they were included in this initial suggested list. The new revised suggested list, as we talked about, is based on what actually came in to us. And if we try to make that list cleaner, but have a broad scope, Julianne has done the bulk of this work. We now have a new suggested list for cause of injury that includes 17 Tier 1 classifications and only 80 codes. But with those 80 codes, we can capture 91% of all the events that were reported using the whole ICD-10 code options, right? So it includes these 1,365 codes. Let me show you a little bit how we made that happen. So here is basically the new list. It includes over 4 million causes of injury and includes more than the 2017 data. But you can see it still has this tiered system. Here's the parent, and here's the simple description. And when we include these 80 codes, it represents 91% of all the ICD-10 codes that have been submitted to us, but the categories are broad, right? So if you come here to MVC, for example, so motor vehicle crashes, there are just hundreds and hundreds of codes associated with this V section that have been sent to us, but here we're basically collapsing all of the, for example, types of crashes that include a bus accident just under the V79.9 code as an example. And here you can see, just to make it clear, you can see the frequency with which this was reported among the almost 5 million records. So here you can see we have kept in a couple of these things that were particularly important to some states, so like asphyxiation in the bed linen. Clearly, it was not reported very often at all. It was a very, very rare event, but we've only used 41 times out of 5 million records, but we've retained those, some of those. But you can see that there are some large capments, for example, falls on a same level. Things like that will represent a large percentage of the calls that we received. Here's another one: car accident not otherwise specified was 14% of our 5 million reported causes of injury. So that's what we have done. So we've actually, I think, provided codes that would capture over 90% of all the submitted codes that have come into us. They're in larger groups. We're purporting this as maybe the cleanest way to update our suggested lists, and then again would suggest that it be used by states and by software. It clearly doesn't roll everything up, but perhaps to reduce the burden on our providers, maybe it's a good place to start, among your states, and then maybe asking if there are additional codes that needed to be added, adding those, and then also still having the full pattern available for them to use. But we've got to figure out some way to reduce the burden on our providers. I have not seen every kind of front end on software that they use to, for example, for cause of injury. Some of them may be very slick, but we are still hearing some concerns about the time to go through those processes. So I'll kind of stop there and just ask if there are any comments about the work that we're currently doing with suggested lists. states, so I'll open up the conversation. It would be really helpful. We're putting a lot of time into these reviews of these suggested lists. I want to make sure we're going in a direction that's helpful.
Clay, Chuck from Wisconsin. I applaud you on this. This is very good. I especially like the idea that it was based on actual history, and by covering 90% of them, I think that's a fantastic start. Love it.
Thanks, Chuck. Other comments about this approach? Do states feel like this will continue to be a valuable tool to use to have these suggested lists? Is there still interest in being able to look at these lists and understand what would capture 90% of all calls, type of a thing?
I would say that I get a lot of complaints that they can't seem to find what they want. Whether this will actually answer it or not is another question, but maybe tweaking the terminology and putting maybe a little more local label on it or something like that might help it that way.
Great, thanks, Chuck. What about the vendors on the call? Do they see this work as valuable based on what you're hearing from your customers?
Hey, Clay, this is Ryan. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Ryan. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, I definitely think it's valuable, and I just want to say that again, I think that the important thing is that we have the right categories and the right pick list items for what the states need and what the national data set needs for specificity, and then allow, as far as the user experience, let the vendors solve the user experience question themselves inside the product. So if that's the ability to have locally set labels that map to the national categories or whatever that might be, makes the most sense. But I would encourage you to continue on this path of keeping the list of possible injuries at the level of specificity and the level of comprehensiveness that the states need.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. That's a really good description, I think, of the course that we've decided on. So that's incredibly valuable. Are you finding, Ryan, and you specifically, are your users, are you finding a way to solve this complex problem that seems to be working for your users? Right out, you're right. We can provide this suggested list, but every state is going to have additions that they'd like to have, or others that they want to drop or have mapped in some way, even if we provide this suggested list. And then there's the 90% that we're not accounting, the 10% we're not accounting for as well. So you're right. At the software product level, you're having to come up with a solution that works. Are you feeling like you're coming up with solutions that are meeting the needs of your customers, and they're not still struggling to be able to identify a code?
Yeah, I think we are, and we took a multi-pronged approach to that. One, of course, we know what states the users are in, so we can align the list to what the states have, and then after that, we further allow individual departments to customize the human readable portion of the item without altering the underlying code. So if, for instance, they would rather have it say nosebleed than a more clinical term for that, that's fine. And we also allow them to reorder the list so that they can take the most common items and move those towards the top, or reorganize them in whatever logical sense makes it best matches their own operation. Mm-hmm. I think what that cuts down on is, you know, if I'm in the field and I'm looking at a list of 90 or 100 things or 144 things on a list, and the one I want is 132 down, I'm probably going to stop at that unknown, or I'm probably going to stop at something first if I can't jump directly to it through a filter or something like that. So there's a lot of different approaches that you can take in software experience to help a user find an individual item on a large pick list that they want to, and none of those really require dumbing the list down, which is only going to hurt the state and the national data set as things just get pushed into broader and broader categories. So I fully support keeping the comprehensive and specific list that we have, and then letting the vendors manage the experience to make it easier for the providers to find the right items on the list.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. That's very helpful. Other comments from the vendor community?
Hey, this is Josh Legler. You know, on the face of it, the 91% makes me, you know, a little nervous, I guess, thinking that out of every 11 calls with an injury, one of them is a call where the provider is not going to find something on the list for what that injury cause was. But I don't know that that's entirely true. My guess would be that a lot of those other 9% are actually very detailed codes that may be children or children of codes that are in fact selected for the list. So I think like vehicle crash would be a good example. There's probably a ton of child codes under a motor vehicle crash. So you may in fact be covering more than 91% if you kind of reanalyze it from that perspective.
Yeah, Josh, that's a really good thought. Julianne, having completed this work and kind of thinking about what Josh just said, would you modify that 91%?
It would be difficult to accurately represent the full percentage because of all of those codes that roll up. We could, I think you're right, Josh, it does represent more, but some of those, that other, you know, 8% of codes are, you know, the 6th and 7th digit of the ICD-10 that goes way down into the weeds, like initial encounter or a subsequent injury, something where the value of that specificity is only in billing and not in the provider value of the data. So I would agree that it is higher than that if the vendors are able to, and if we're able to roll up more numbers into those little bit more broader categories, although they're not super broad, so that we're losing some. It's that balance of specificity between the broadness and being able to capture enough of it. It would be difficult to come up with the exact number that we're capturing with everything that should roll up, because a lot of the vendors are still going to be able to do the search feature, and their clinician is going to be able to pick that really obscure code that's still going to show up in the data.
Yeah, thanks, Julianne. That makes sense.
Do the 91%, how does that span across, you know, different like states and different counties? If you take that 91% portion and you evaluate it in, you know, New York City versus rural Oklahoma, do you get how well does that percentage hold up?
Well, that's a good question, David. I mean, we haven't looked at that percentage by, for example, urbanicity, you know, or a city versus a rural type of setting. That's an interesting thought. I'll take a look and see if there's a way for us to easily do that. But you're right. We'd like to make sure that this list represents 90+% of calls, regardless of kind of the specificity of the area. Right? Is it a state with a beach versus a state with mountains, kind of a thing? the cause of injury could be different. That's a good thought. All right, any other comments about the suggested list work? It sounds like there's support for us to continue with the other suggested list taking this approach. I think that the list will become more meaningful, right? It'll be easy now for us to report to our stakeholders that this is a beginning list that captures, for example, greater than 90% of all the events that are reported to the National Repository. That might be an easy beginning for folks to talk about what to include in the code sets for these elements. Okay, all right. Well, thank you for those discussion points. That was really, really helpful. All right, the next item of business here. I just got off the phone like 5 minutes before this call with the Office of EMS at NHTSA. They have been wrestling with a conversation that was held during the NEMSIS annual meeting here in Salt Lake City. Those who attended may remember there was a joint meeting held with the EMS directors and the state data managers to talk about issues related to NEMSIS, among other things. One of them was the timeline. Hopefully folks are seeing the timeline for 3.5 revision. One of the comments that was shared by several states, including Florida and Wyoming, was that they were disappointed with the 334 close date of September of 2019. So that red box you can see on the left-hand side. So again, I'll just define that. What that basically meant is that just at the national level, we would stop accepting records in the 334 version in September of this year. NHTSA has spoken with several of those states. They've been discussing this since that meeting, and they have decided to extend the sunset date for 334 NEMSIS. So there'll be a formal letter that will be coming out of the Office of EMS, I imagine this week or early next, that will announce that. But Eric with the Office of EMS asked that I would make an initial announcement on this call. So the date that they would that they're prescribing to sunset 334 would be moved from September 2019 to March of 2021, right here. So we will come up with a new timeline for your use among your customers. I'll also note that the date for the sunsetting of 3.4.0 will not change. It will remain January 2023. The other thing the Office of EMS wanted me to make sure was clear was that people need to keep in mind that with ET3, there'll probably be some requested changes to the standard that we will accommodate with custom elements until they can be incorporated into a version of NEMSIS. So I think the Office of EMS just wanted to let folks know that with these very innovative projects that are just poised to really help our industry move forward in many ways, that there may be some other custom releases that we'd like to standardize across the country that will happen before the rollout of another version. So any comments related to that decision? Do vendors see any technical impediments to extending that sunset date?
Maybe more on the NEMSIS side, right? You guys are trying to cut off 334. How are things on your side?
Does extending the sunset date alter any of the 3.5 candidate release or compliance testing dates?
Yeah, great question. No, they won't. moving the date won't affect any of the timelines we have in place for 3.5. That's a good question. All right, any other comments related to the change of the sunset date for 3.3.4? All right, as I mentioned, there's a formal letter that the Office of EMS is completing. I would imagine that will be out this week or early next, and so your stakeholders and your customers will know about that change, and we will have had this conversation. So hopefully that will be helpful to you as you try to socialize that idea. Okay, all right. The last item I have is just in regards to the closure of the data for 2018. We use that word closure loosely, and I just wanted to define that briefly, because the way that we're, quote, closing out years of data is different now in version 2 than version 3. So folks will, with great joy, remember those phone calls from Karin as she was struggling to close down a year's worth of data in version 2 so that we could finalize a public research data set using the data each year. So she'd begin 3 months after the end of a year, and she'd have 3 months to control everybody to get their data complete, and then we would try to have a research data set for the previous year out about 7 months after that year had concluded. So that has changed under version 3. We still want to call a date where we close a year's worth of data and be able to snapshot it and then be able to build an annual research data set. The value of that, of course, is if we have one data set that all research is based on for a particular year, then all the research done with that data set is comparable across all studies, right? There's not 2 studies using 2018 data that has a different count of the number of cardiac arrests. It's always the same. So the data remains comparable across all studies. That's why we try to snapshot it at some point. But under version 3, of course, we're using web services, data collection. We'd love every state to just remain concurrent with their data submissions to us. So there really isn't a call for data to close for a particular year. And in fact, we'd like in future years, so example, for the 2019 data, we'd like to just mid-January snapshot the data set because all of the data submissions are concurrent. And on January 2nd, when we get up in the morning, all of the 2019 data is already in because it's January 2nd of 2020. So that we're hoping that all states will try to remain concurrent. We of course will accept your version 3 records, your 2017 records if you wish, 2018 records, but if you're submitting those at the cost of remaining concurrent on 2019, we would rather that you just switch and just be sending us 2019 so that we can in fact have really concurrent data sets. So the cube that's used probably 80 to 90 times a day, that is concurrent. People love the fact that they can go in there and look at cardiac arrest that happened last week across the country. So that's just there's just real value in us trying to keep our data submissions concurrent. So we're closing the 2018 data based on that definition. We're snapshotting it. We kept it open. There were several states that wanted to catch up on some past data. That's now in. We're closing the 2018 data with 21 million EMS activations. So kudos to everyone on this call for just the incredible work again. We've just been able to exponentially grow the version 3 submissions to the idea that we have, again, over 20 million records per year, which is just incredible, just incredible. So thank you for all the hard work you do. There's just great research that's coming out of this national data set. Now over 800 scholarly publications in Google Scholar using NEMSIS data. So just great stuff. So thank you. We'll be preparing that research data set. I imagine it will be available by mid-July for use. And then we're hoping the 2019 data set to be available much earlier in the year of 2020, hopefully in February or March. So any questions about the 2018 public research data set? All right, I will hand it back over to you, Julianne.
All right. Monet is going to talk to us a little bit about Healthy People 2020.
So Monet, this is Clay. You might be muted.
All right, let's go ahead and give Monet a couple minutes. Laurel, do you have something you'd like to show us for the agency submission dashboard? And then we'll come right back around to Monet.
Yes, I do. Can I take the presenter?
You can.
All right, so hopefully everyone sees a Tableau dashboard now. Let me know if you see something else. So this is a dashboard that we put together in the last week or so that is kind of just an exact copy of something we had under version 2, and it just tracks submissions by the unit notified by dispatch date for a state or for the agencies within a state. So right now I'm logged in as myself, so we're just seeing all submissions by unit notified by dispatch date since 2017. So you might be familiar with the version 2 version of this. It's just a line graph of submissions. And if there's a drop from one week to the next, the line is colored to indicate how big the drop was. So orange is 30 to 40% drop, and red would be a more than 40% drop. So you can see for this week, it looks like we don't have as many records as we would expect to have based on the amount we had last week. So it's pretty simple. It also includes a table that breaks this out by agency and gives you all the numbers. So when you open this up for your state, this is for state data managers, what you would see right here would be a list of agency numbers, and then you would be able to scroll this graph side to side to see data from January 2017 all the way up through present day, and then up and down through your list of agencies to see what their submissions look like. So this could be useful, for example, if you see a dip on your on the line chart, oh, my state was missing data for this week. You could then scroll down and break out, well, which agencies is that coming from? Oh, there's a 42% drop here, so I need to call that agency and maybe investigate that. So pretty simple. We're looking at getting this ready to put it into production, looking for feedback, definitely, if there's anything that's missing here, or if this information would not be helpful, that would be great to know. So yeah, if anyone has any comments or feedback on that, now would be a great time to speak up.
Laurel, this is Clay. Could you choose a state where it looks like there's been a reduction and just kind of show, or excuse me, not choose a state, but choose an agency where it looks like they may have had some type of a weird kind of disruption in submissions, just so that the data managers would see what that would look like?
Okay, yeah. So for this agency, maybe it looks like there was a dip in February. So I might not be able to click it because there's this gray bar here.
Oh, okay. Let's see if it'll work.
Looks like I can't because of the gray bar. But,
oh, okay, okay.
Normally, like all of our Tableau dashboards, you can click on things and it'll filter it. So if you clicked on this agency number, it would then, this graph would then change to show you the weekly breakout for that agency. And again, like most of our dashboards, you can break the time out using these tiny plus minus buttons when you mouse over the headers. So if you hit plus, it'll go up to years. If you hit minus, it'll go down to months. Again, kind of hard to click on that because I have this nice gray bar blurring out agency numbers. But that's the general idea.
Is there going to be a way to do this by vendor, by agency as well? So you could see if maybe there was a vendor issue versus an agency issue?
That's a great comment. I did not include any vendor filtering in this, but I could definitely include that as a drop down quite easily. Right now, our only filters are date, agency, and state. So we could definitely add vendor in there. I mean, how detailed would you want to go? Would you want to go down to version numbers to try and identify a version of vendor software, or would it just be enough to know which vendor created the software?
I think a version number would be important as well.
Okay.
I mean, this is Tim, by the way, hearing what Mark is going through out in California, with 70 different versions running around,
yeah,
that can create issues.
Yeah, and that can also create issues on our side. One of my goals in building this was to make sure that it ran quickly, and the more ways we break down the data, the slower it's going to run. So I think it's a good ask for version number, and I'll see what I can't do to work that in there, because I understand why that would be very valuable to have. Okay, well, I'm not really hearing anything else. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Julianne. And if anyone has any suggestions or comments or any report that you really want to see out of the TAC, please feel free to let me know. Send me an email so we can work on getting that built for you.
Thank you, Laurel. Monet, do you want to talk to us a little bit about the Healthy People 2020?
Can you hear me now?
I can, thank you.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Good morning or afternoon, everyone. I will be quick. Centers for Disease Control and their Center for Preparedness and Response has contacted us regarding updating some data used to support the Healthy People 2020 preparedness objectives. The information that they're looking for is the number of agencies that are submitting data to NEMSIS. I have basically started sending emails to state managers requesting this information. However, I have not received very many responses, and that's okay. I understand everyone is busy. However, I would like to either start calling just to ask for this information. In previous years, Karen Jacobson has completed, with the assistance of the NEDART team, a pretty lengthy survey. Now, I understand that survey had many questions, and really I only have one question, and that question would simply be how many EMS agencies should be submitting data to the NEMSIS TAC. I want to borrow your screen, or maybe Julianne, if you could just go to the NEMSIS website and go to the submission summary report for me. Okay, maybe I'll go ahead and see if I can share my screen.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go. We can see it now.
You can see my screen?
Yep, we can.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so when you look at your submission summary reports that are sent on Tuesdays, this box in the middle that has the active agencies, The first, well, actually here it says, let me make sure okay, it says the number of active agencies. Now this is collective across the United States for all the states that are currently submitting. However, each state has a number of active agencies that submitted data that week. And what I'm looking for is the actual denominator, which is the licensed agencies. Now, in some states, you may have flight services or non-transporting services or services that rarely have a call, although they're licensed. So what I would like to do is confirm the actual denominator. And for those of you who have submitted updated state dataset builder or state datasets and they have a new agency list, I can use that number. So for example, Nebraska sends us an update every week, and I can use the number that is in their current list of agencies, the number that they have for their agencies. But if I don't want to presume that all of these numbers are correct, so I will be reaching out to you to just verify the number. And because I want to kill two birds with one stone, I simply would like to be able to provide the update to the CDC and also update these numbers on the submission dashboard at the same time. So that's my simple request, and I thank you in advance. And if you have any questions, let me know. If you would like the link to the Healthy People 2020 survey, I can also put that in the chat. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Monet. We'll go ahead and turn it over to Josh for his training on the Performance Measures web service.
Okay, thank you, Julianne. I'll see if I can take screen sharing here. All right. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. A couple weeks ago on this call, we announced that the NEMSIS Performance Measures web service went live. And this morning, we're going to spend some time looking at the technical details of that web service. This training is really from the perspective of software developers who work for vendors. And you could potentially utilize the Performance Measures web service from NEMSIS to augment the reporting capabilities that you provide to your customers. So that's the perspective we'll take today, and kind of digging into the technical details of this web service and how to utilize it. Just as some quick background, this web service implements performance measures that were defined and published by the EMS Compass project, which was about a 2-year effort a couple of years ago to define performance measures that could be used consistently throughout EMS. The Compass project finished. It was headed up by the National Association of State EMS Officials. There was a bit of a gap, and then NHTSA put together the successor to EMS Compass, which is called the National EMS Quality Alliance, or NEMSQA. NEMSQA is going to pick up where EMS Compass left off with the performance measures that EMS Compass published. They are going to revisit those performance measures, potentially make improvements to them to make them more accurate, and as well as adopting additional performance measures for EMS. The NEMSIS Performance Measures web service, as I said, implements performance measures that were published through EMS Compass. We have found some weaknesses in some of those measures, and we have submitted our comments to NEMSQA, and we anticipate in the future to implement additional performance measures as they come out from NEMSQA. Here's the purpose of the Performance Measures web service. The idea is that your EMS software product could query the NEMSIS Performance Measures web service, get some data back from that web service about national level performance on these performance measures. And using that national level data, then you could just, put that data together with the data for your customer, their own data, to provide a report to your customer that shows both your customer's data as well as comparison to the rest of the country, that national level benchmarking comparison. Your customer may be a state, as I've illustrated here, or it may be a specific agency. And the nation here that I've illustrated may be the entire country, or it may be EMS agencies with certain attributes that are similar to the attributes of your customer's agency. So that's the idea, that you'll be able to take this data from the national level, correlate it or combine it with the specific customer data that you hold for your customers, and provide a comparison or benchmarking report. Here's an example of the kind of report or chart that you may provide to your customers. Today, you have the ability to draw this red line here. You have the ability to take the definition for EMS Compass, in this case, trauma-01, pain assessment of injured patients. You can calculate that using your customer's own data and show your customer where their performance is over time. What the NEMSIS Performance Measure Web Service does is it gives you the additional ability to draw this blue line for your customer. This blue line represents that national benchmark, or a subset of the national data that represents agency attributes that are similar to your customer's agency. So that's what the Performance Measure Web Service will do. It'll allow you to draw that second line that allows your customers to then be able to benchmark themselves against the rest of the country. We have implemented such a tool or product through the NEMSIS TAC. There is a NEMSIS Tableau dashboard, and it does just that. It allows the public, anyone, to look at the performance measure data for the performance measures that we've implemented so far. They'll see that performance trend over time, and they'll also see different ways that that performance breaks down by agency attributes. I'm going to take just a minute to show you that dashboard because I think it may help you to visualize the sorts of products that you can provide to your customers using this data. So I'm on the public reports page of the NEMSIS website. I could also go to the EMS agency reports page and find a link there as well. I'm going to go to the version 3 dashboards. And the performance measure dashboard is the one at the top of the page today. So I'll click on that. Okay, so this is the one that's publicly available, no authentication needed. I can select between the different performance measures that are currently available and see how the nation is performing on these performance measures. So here it is for trauma-01. This is how often a pain assessment was done on injured patients. And I can see the performance trend, and then I can see the different areas where I could drill down to compare that performance by different attributes. So, you know, if I was working for an EMS agency, I might say, well, that's great to compare myself to the whole nation, but really I want to look at myself compared to other agencies that are similar to me. I am an urban, non-volunteer fire department with a call volume between 10,000 and 50,000 calls per year. And my agency provides service at the ALS level. By applying all of those filters, this performance trend now represents agencies with those attributes rather than just the entire nation. And so when you provide a product to your customer that allows them to look at their performance, you could do a similar thing through the data that you will get from the Performance Measures web service, and allow your customers to see data that compares them to agencies that are similar to theirs. Okay, so technical details for the Performance Measure web service. There is a technical guide. I want to show you where that's at. And much of what I'll cover today is contained in the technical guide, so that'll be your reference after the training today. I'm going to go to the technical resources and go to web services. If I scroll down to the bottom of this page, there is a new section here for the Performance Measures API. There is a link to the technical guide right here. And we're going to take a look also at the measure definitions in just a second. There is the WSDL that I can grab, so I can load that into my development environment to interact with the web service. And there is also the link to that Tableau dashboard that I just showed you a second ago. Okay, so these are the measures that are currently implemented and that will be implemented in the web service. We've started initially with these 3 measures, one for seizure, one for stroke, and one for trauma. Then we've also identified 8 additional measures from EMS Compass that can be implemented using data from the national EMS database, national elements. EMS Compass published more measures than this, but some of the measures that they published require data elements that would only be available at the local or state level that are not part of the national database. And there are even a handful of measures that require information outside of the NEMSIS standard altogether. But these are the measures that can be calculated using national data. So we've currently implemented these 3, and the plan is on about a 2-month schedule to release these additional measures. So we are planning for releasing Trauma-02 by the end of August, Safety-01 by the end of October, etc., through partway through next year to release these additional measures. We wanted to release this product with the initial 3 measures now because we know that you'll need lots of lead time on the developer side to actually work this into your development plans as a feature that you can provide to your customers and start working on kind of your basic infrastructure for it. So while you're working on that as software developers, we can be pounding out these additional measures. Oops. Get back to my slides here. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the documentation. First, for the measures themselves. This was a link that you can take from the web services page that we were just on. It'll bring you to this page that gives full documentation of each of the performance measures that's implemented. These are using the EMS Compass labeling, definitions, technical implementation specifications. So our goal has been to stay really consistent with the way that it was published by EMS Compass, even if we saw limitations in that definition. And Seizure-01 is a good example of that. This is a measure of seizure patients who received an evaluation of their blood glucose. You can see the denominator and numerator here using NEMSIS data elements in this kind of pseudocode. So they're looking for certain primary impressions, certain ICD-10 codes, and then checking if blood glucose was recorded or not. Now, we did make a note on this one that ICD-10 code that they're looking for of G40.901 is overly restrictive. And we would recommend looking at G40.anything1 to get all seizures with status epilepticus. However, we're going with the definition as it was created by EMS Compass in order to ensure consistency nationally in the way that these measures are implemented. That's a good example of the kind of feedback that we have provided to NEMSQA for future revisions to these measures. So this is where you'll get the documentation of each performance measure, exactly how it's defined and calculated. Next, the different parameters that are available. You'll see as we utilize the performance measure web service itself, the web service will tell you what parameters you can use for querying. But there is documentation of all of the details of these parameters as well. I'll just skip down to that section. For example, the geography, we're looking at US census regions and divisions, and they're based on the data that came in DAgency.04, the EMS agency state. Or for urbanicity, you want to know how we calculated urban-rural. We based it on EScene.19, the incident zip code, and we have a link to the documentation here from the USDA about the urban-rural designations. Organization status, organization type, you can see that those came from specific NEMSIS data elements. Agency annual patient contact volume, we are actually calculating that based on data, records received in the national database over the prior year. And so we explain the calculation method that we use for that. And the level of care, how we've taken eResponse.15 as the basis for that parameter. So that's where you can get all the details about how each parameter has been calculated or defined. All right, so let's take a look at the web service itself. It has 3 operations. List benchmarks will give you a list of the different performance measures that are currently supported by the service. List parameters will give you a list of all the different parameters that are supported and the different codes that you would use for filtering or grouping the data by those parameters. And finally, retrieve benchmark, that's the heavy lifter there, the one that actually gives you the data that you're looking for these performance measures. All right, so I'm going to go here to the NEMSIS website again, to the web services page. I'm going to grab the WSDL link. And I'm going to use SOAP UI to demonstrate today. So I'm going to make a new SOAP project using that WSDL. And we'll go ahead and load that up. And you'll see it has these 3 operations here. Let's take a look at each of these. The list benchmarks request is a simple request that has no parameterization to it, so you just simply run it. And the response that you get is a list of the performance measures that are currently implemented in the web service. The important thing here is that each performance measure has an ID. That's how you're going to identify it when you request data. And then, of course, it has the actual label of that performance measure. Okay, so we'll maybe look at data for stroke-01 in just a minute. The second operation is list parameters. This is also just a simple request with nothing to fill in. And the web service will provide a list of all of the parameters that are supported including the codes that you'll use to filter or segment the data by these parameters. So for example, if you wanted to filter down to just data for urban, then you'll see that there's a parameter code called urbanicity, and then there's a value code within that parameter that represents urban. So in a minute, we'll see how to utilize that. So that's your list of kind of, the menu, everything that's available. And finally, the request benchmark or retrieve benchmark request. Okay, so this is the retrieve benchmark request. We're going to tell it what benchmark we want to receive data for. And I want to look at stroke-01, stroke patients who received a stroke scale evaluation. And then you'll see there's, we can apply one or more filter to our data, and we can also ask for the data to be segmented or grouped by a particular parameter. We can also just run the request without any filtering or segmentation, so let's do that first. So this would be the simplest request that we could run. Make sure my request is valid, and it is. So this gave us the stroke-01 data. and it just simply gave us a numerator and a denominator, across all of the different parameters and time frame that is supported by this web service. It's just one numerator and denominator. Okay, so that's nice, but we might want to filter or segment our data. So let's take a look at that. Let's go ahead and put in a filter first, and let's say we wanted urban only. So the parameter is urbanicity, and if we go back to our list parameters request, we'll see urban has this code of P01001. So we're going to grab that code and put that into our request here. So we're saying now, give me stroke-01 where the urbanicity is the code for urban. We're going to rerun the request in a second, and what you'll see is the numerator and denominator will both be slightly smaller than what we got the first time. So here we go. Oops. Let me take out this optional segment thing that we're not doing yet. Okay, and so now we're looking at the numerator and denominator, but it's filtered down to urban only. So that's the filtering, and we can apply multiple filters at the same time. So let's say, let's apply a second filter, and we're going to look at, I think it was called org type. Let's go take a look here on our parameters. Okay, org type, and we're going to let's grab hospital. So hospital-based EMS. And run this again. Oops. Take out my segment, which we're not using yet. Okay, so now we have two filters applied and even smaller numbers here for our numerator and denominator, representing the performance by hospital-based EMS in urban areas. So that's the filtering. Lastly, we can choose to segment this data so that we get it split out by some parameter. And the most common parameter you're probably going to use will be either calendar year or calendar month. From our list parameters response, we see that calendar month is, there's the code for that parameter, calendar month, or calendar year, there's the code for that parameter. So I'm going to ask for it to be segmented by calendar year. We'll go ahead and run that again. This time we get a set of numerators and denominators, and each of those sets represents one member of the calendar year parameter. So we have the numerator and denominator for 2017, for 2018, and for 2019. And this is the kind of query you might run if you want to provide a time trend to your customers. If I want to even be more detailed, I could group it by calendar month instead. And now we have something for each month of these 3 years. Okay, so I want to pause here and see if there are any questions, either on kind of the background stuff I shared, the documentation, the measures that we're using, the parameters, or anything you'd like to see or questions that you have from this demonstration and from the actual kind of technical implementation interacting with this web service. Any questions at this point? Okay, if not, I want to take a few more minutes to cover just some additional little topics about this web service, and then open it up again for questions. So in addition to the numerator and denominator data, the web service also returns some metadata that helps you to provide some context to the data that you're getting. It has the following metadata. Database update date time will just tell you the last time that the underlying database supporting this web service was last updated. And that'll typically be sometime within the last week. Database records will tell you just how many records, how many patient care reports are in the underlying database. So it'll be, a big number like 40 million. And then the benchmark is an echo back of the benchmark request that you made. So it'll tell you which benchmark you requested, which filters you asked to be applied, and how you wanted it to be segmented. It just echoes that back to you. And then for the data results, you'll see an attribute called states, and that will tell you how many states contributed to the data that was selected for your specific request. So if I look here at this response, scroll sideways a little bit here, I see that 29 states were represented in the data that had those specific filters that I applied. If I apply no filters at all, I'll get a bigger number of states represented. Obviously, if I apply filters at the region or division level, census region or division, I could get a number of states, as little as maybe 5 or 6, because I filtered it geographically. And lastly, the number of records that were selected by your criteria for that particular performance measure. So here I'll see, for example, that out of the database, out of the total database of 44 million records, with the filters that I applied and this particular performance measure being related to strokes, there were 14,859 records that got selected by my request. That's the metadata that you'll get. In addition, you will occasionally see small cell suppression going on. If you make a request that's very detailed with lots of filters applied, then it is possible that you could have a particular segment or cell that has fewer than 6 records contributing data to that cell. And when that happens, we will use small cell suppression. So you'll still see, for example, if you've segmented it by something, like in this case, we're segmenting it by calendar month, you'll still see what segment it is that had the small cell suppression, but you will not see an attribute indicating how many records contributed to that segment. And the numerator and denominator will both be present, but they'll be empty with XSI nil equals true. So that's what you'll expect to see when small cell suppression happens, or if there were just simply no records at all for a particular segment. So you'll want to code for that potential thing to happen. Error handling is also implemented in this service. So I've given an example here where I requested the data for a performance measure called Trauma 99. Trauma 99 does not exist, so you'll get an error response back instead of getting data back. So you'll get a retrieve benchmark response. It'll have a status with a negative number code, which will indicate that there was a problem. And then it'll have a description of the reason for the error. So again, you'll want to potentially code for those potential responses, handling any errors that may occur. Okay, finally, performance and availability. In terms of response time, this web service currently seems to be returning responses in less than 2 seconds for most data requests. There are a few that take 3 or 4 seconds, and some that are quite a bit shorter. So that's the response time that we're seeing today. And in terms of uptime guarantees, this performance measure web service is on the NEMSIS production system schedule. So that's so you're going to experience the same level of uptime guarantee with this service as you do with the National EMS Database Data Submission Web Service. So an always up schedule with occasional scheduled system downtimes for system maintenance. Okay, so I would encourage you to take a look on the web services page of the NEMSIS website, grab the technical guide, which contains much of what I covered today. Grab that WSDL and load it into your development environment, start playing with it, and start exploring how you may be able to utilize the National Performance Measures web service to augment and enhance the data that you give to your customers as they look at their performance on these measures. With that, I'll open it up to any questions or discussion on anything I've covered.
Nice presentation, Josh.
Oh, thanks, Chuck. Any questions, especially from vendors, as you're looking at how you may implement this? Anything that I can help answer? Okay, well, hearing no questions, we welcome you to just start playing with this, put stuff into your development plans to utilize this web service. In the meantime, we'll keep cranking out the additional measures. The web service is publicly available, so you don't need a specific account to use it. You can just start hitting it and start querying. So, all right, well, thanks everyone for your attention today for this training. Any follow-up questions that come up, feel free to get in touch with us. All right, Julianne, back to you.
Thank you, Josh. We appreciate that presentation. The next item on the agenda, Clay already addressed with the announcement from the NETSA's Office of EMS. Are there any issues, concerns, questions, comments from any of the participants today? I just want to draw your attention to the upcoming meetings. July 24th standing meeting has been canceled due to the Utah State holiday, and we moved up the first meeting in August to August 7th because of the NEMSIS annual meeting on the 12th. So there's a couple of changes in the July and August V3 implementation call meetings. If there is nothing else from the participants, I think we're good to go. Thank you all so much for calling in, taking time out of your busy schedules. We appreciate that, and we appreciate your input, comments, questions, concerns, anything you have for us. So with that, thank you and have a fabulous day.
You too, thank you.